Hi, Joel. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect.
All right, it's exciting. Can you see me?
I sure can.
Okay. Mhm. Mhm.
Hey, Lauren and Crystal, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Hey, hello.
Hello, Neil. How are you?
Doing well, and yourself?
Doing well, thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see everybody. Yeah, good to see you. And
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, happy Monday.
Yeah.
nice little bit of rain. Hopefully, it's not the last of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Carrie, are we ready to start?
Hi, Brittany. We are ready to start the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll call to order the Cotati Planning Commission meeting on March 15th, 2021. And may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Rodriguez. Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Hancock.
Yeah.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
Vice Chair Lemus.
Here.
Chair Murphy.
Here. Okay, moving on to item C. Any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Chair Murphy.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move into the next item. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of,
You are. It's my phone. Sorry. I'm having a little trouble. I'm good. Okay.
Great, thank you. So we'll move into oral and written comment. I would ask that you please say your name for the record and limit your comments for items that are not agendized for tonight's discussion.
Chair Murphy, it does not appear that we have any public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Then we will move to item E, matters at hand. Do we have an additional staff report this evening or updates to provide? This is for the.
I do, Chair Murphy, this is JP Harries. I do have a brief presentation. I will try to keep it brief. There's not a whole lot of new information since our last workshop. But we do have one new commissioner. And so it might be helpful if I just kind of cruise through it kind of quickly. If that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, JP.
Lauren, can you put up the PowerPoint for the cottage housing?
Just give me 1 second.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Murphy and members of the commission. My name is JP Harries. I'm a senior planner with the city of Cotati. And tonight we're proposing to ask the commission to adopt a resolution recommending city council approval of the proposed ordinance that we have crafted for cottage housing. You'll recall back in December and in February, we held workshops on the cottage housing. We had some public comment. All members of the commission were able to provide some comments, including members of the previous commission. So we were glad to have it kind of go over the two commissions. So we felt like we got a lot of good feedback, and we did get a lot of good feedback. The ordinance actually went through several iterations, all based on comments that were received from public and the commission. And I think we've got a really good product. I look forward to presenting it tonight. Next slide, please. So again, just some background. This effort is being funded by an SB2 planning grant. There's several things that we're trying to do with this planning grant, all related to increasing the amount of housing, especially affordable housing in the city of Cotati. And the first was the ADU, JADU code amendment. This is the cottage housing effort that we're doing. You're going to hear tonight from Joel, who's going to talk about the objective design guidelines. And in a future meeting, you'll be hearing about by right multifamily housing. Next slide, please. So we had several goals for this, primarily to promote sustainable development through smaller and more efficient housing. We wanted to diversify the city's housing stock with, again, smaller homes that can be affordable. Our intent was to look for areas where we can do infill development as opposed to, just adding on and sprawling the city out. And we're looking at providing a density bonus to encourage this type of development. We also were interested in creating functional common open space that would foster a sense of community and ownership with the development. We wanted to provide private areas as well as the common area, which would encourage a diversity of landscape design. And again, feel like people belong to a community and have some ownership in that community. And we were looking to maintain the character of the existing residential neighborhoods. And part of that is modeling this ordinance on very similar developments that previously had occurred in Cotati and keeping that same trend alive here. Next slide, please. Our main target with this type of ordinance is to target the missing middle. Now, these can be all affordable, and they could also be all very high-end developments. But by encouraging smaller home sizes, we think our effort is to try to target the missing middle by allowing these variety of choices that you can see both above in the top left and the bottom right images, which are attached and detached housing options, including ADUs, conversions of existing structures, small homes clustered together all the way up to floorplexes. And next slide, please. Some of the key elements that is contained within the housing, within the proposed ordinance, they would be permitted in almost all the residential districts, not in rural residential, but almost every other residential district. It would require a use permit, so Planning Commission would be reviewing any cottage housing application that came forward. They would have to come forward with the cottage housing development plan, which essentially would just show how they are complying with the ordinance as it's prepared. It does have both common and open space, common and private open space requirements. It does intend to cluster the units around that open space. And the private open spaces hopefully would abut up to the common open space. So you get a layer where we look at it as kind of layers of transition from the public area within the development to the private area to the porch to the home. So kind of basically creating these layers of privacy. The homes would be limited to 1,600 square feet in size. There is the ability to have double the density at the most. It would allow for development of ADUs and JADUs. It does include communal amenities and bicycle and pedestrian pathways. Homes will be required to have covered porches. We do have an energy demand requirement that must be met with solar. As well, we also require 50% of the parking spaces to be supplied with EV charging stations. There are limits on the size of different things like garages and carports. And it does allow for rentals, subdivision, and sale of the individual units. And also the ordinance has flexibility in the design standards kind of built in order to, especially in order to accommodate any natural environmental resources that might be on the property and lead to preservation, and or just to make a project work where there might just be some small standard that is difficult to meet, but overall it still is a good project. There's flexibility built into the ordinance to allow for that to happen. Next slide, please. And these are just some images that kind of capture some of the ideas. One is in the center, top center, you have like the garden areas, which would be a communal amenity. You could see in these areas how the common space transitions into these private low fenced yards up to the porches. There's just some images of the ideas. And next slide, please. And these are all in your packet as well. And then I did want to say that there's a whole number of general plan policies and actions and objectives, as well as housing element policies and goals of policies and objectives that this ordinance is intended to meet. And I don't want to go read these all out, but essentially I'll cruise through them fairly quickly. But land use policy 2.2 is encourage clustering of housing in order to create larger open space areas, encourage social interaction between neighbors and new residential developments, encourage a concentration of neighborhood, community, and retail amenities and services within walking distance of residential areas. Revise the design review guidelines to require clustering or other measures to preserve a sense of openness in new developments. Provide new opportunities for community gathering and social interaction through park facilities, community centers. And encourage and when possible, prioritize development of infill and underutilized sites within mostly developed areas. And next slide. Those are general plans specific. And then within the housing element, I didn't list all of them, and actually some looks like they got cut off, but just some highlights. Consider land use redesignation in order to accommodate specific projects, basically in order to maintain Cotati's rural character. Ensure that the city's development requirements accommodate and provide for available housing sites that are appropriate for a range of income levels. Require housing developments to provide housing stock at a range of affordability levels. Encourage housing on existing infill and provide incentives for affordable housing development, including density bonuses, relaxation and development standards, promote energy efficiency, encourage energy efficiency, and ensure public participation in the development of cities' housing policies, which we've done through our workshops in this meeting here tonight. Next slide, please. So this is in your packet as well as there's a detailed strikeout, underline and strikeout of the ordinance or of the code section as you saw from workshop 1, then workshop 2, and now you can see the final edits to it. But essentially what we did is we got rid of a lot of that vague wording. There were certain areas where we did need to keep it, and we keep the word to the extent feasible. And those words, though they are vague, they're not uncommon phrases in land use planning, and we do have to use them at times, and we're comfortable with the words feasible. And we know what they mean. Building separation provisions have been clarified. There was some confusion with that. Residential units were clarified that they need to abut the common open space on at least 2 sides. We removed the limitation of separate open space areas allowed per cluster. That seemed unnecessary the way we had it, a limitation on that. We expanded the list of recommended common area features to include swimming pools. They were never not allowed, but it's now it's clear that they are one of the things that could be included. Amended open space calculations to allow setbacks to be included. That may be a part of what becomes functional open space, these setback areas. So we didn't want to exclude those from consideration. Eliminated the provision that required pathways to be accessible to the general public. We clarified the solar requirements apply to the total anticipated electrical demand generated by the units, and clarified that on-street parking outside of the development cannot be used to meet the parking minimums, and clarified that floor area limits of the garages only apply to the vehicle parking areas, not to bicycle storage or just storage in general. And we clarified the parking is not required for JADUs, and that's according to state law, and then corrected some minor errors. And then next slide, please. So that's really all I have to say. We are recommending that the Planning Commission approve the resolution recommending City Council adoption of the draft ordinance, which would amend the land use code to allow for the development and regulation of cottage housing projects. And the resolution is on page 52 of your packet. And the ordinance that would be presented to City Council for approval is on page 56 of your packet. And with that, I will close. I'm available for any questions that you might have or comments. And Jonathan, thank you and welcome. Commissioner Rodriguez, I know there was a lot of information. And I hope if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, JP. With that, I will open it up for questions from the commission. And I will start with Commissioner Rodriguez.
All right. Well, first off, yeah, it was a lot of information, but I'm excited to be a part of it. And I did have a couple of questions regarding the swimming pools. Is there a limit of how big they could be?
JP, you're muted.
Sorry, excuse me. There is no limit on the size of the swimming pools. That's something that we and the commission, we at staff and the commission would look at when the project would come forward. Clearly, we would be looking at something that's, if there was a swimming pool, that's, reasonable to what the development is in terms of its serving.
And on the same question, the cottages are supposed to be around the common spaces. So are you thinking of having the front of all the cottages face the open space?
That's an excellent question. There's not a requirement that they face it, and it depends. There is a requirement that they actually face the open space if they're not on a roadway. So there is an encouragement that there is some facing and there's some porch and yard that meets out onto the common space. So if, for example, if a home didn't have, wasn't right adjacent to the road, then yes, it would be required to face out into that common open space. If it, let's just say, was near a roadway or driveway, and then we would encourage it to have kind of a dual frontage, where its frontage would be both towards the roadway as well as out towards that common space. But the way these projects have been developed around the country, especially here in the West, is yes, they often do face or front into that common open space. And that's the kind of development that we would be encouraging. But we also recognize that there could be a lot of different ways that a project like this could come about. But so the answer is yes and no.
I asked because I was reading the municipal code 17.22.030, and it said that pools can only be placed on the side or the back and not in the front, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, that would be true of somebody's swimming pool on a private, kind of a single family residence on that type of parcel. That would be the case. In this case, I could see what that, first of all, in this case, the cottage housing ordinance takes precedent over that type of conflict where it exists in the code. And that's kind of in the ordinance about how that would happen. Also, if you look at some other communities, let's say like Windmill Farms, they have kind of a centrally located pool, and those homes are set in a way so that some of them do face out towards that swimming pool. And a similar type development could happen here with the cottage housing. So they wouldn't be prevented from facing the pool in this particular situation. Also, they would not be, the pool wouldn't be in their front yard because it technically wouldn't be on any person's private property. It would be commonly held, which is another way of kind of addressing that the common space can have these particular amenities, though they wouldn't belong on someone's private property. Do you follow?
I think you're muted, Commissioner Rodriguez.
I think he froze. I think he's frozen.
I see. Okay, then we will come back around just to make sure Commissioner Rodriguez doesn't have additional questions.
Okay.
But in the interim, I will move on to Commissioner Hancock.
Yeah, yes, hello. Thank you, JP. Good to see it again. And it's great to see all the detail and stuff. I'm just curious, would you say that the Ross Street, the Frog Street common, what they call co-housing, would this meet all the criteria that you've put together? I don't know if you've studied the way that was done and the way everything, that all the details you put together.
I have not done a comparison of our ordinance with the Frog Song co-housing project. There are some elements where absolutely it would be pretty close, and then some areas where, like the mixed use part, this would have to be, this one doesn't accommodate right now. It's not set up to accommodate mixed use development. It's purely a residential development. So in that respect, it's not that it couldn't be used, but that would be the one significant difference, I would say, is the fact that that's a mixed use development in part. And this is a pure residential. And so no, I haven't done it, though. I would say a lot of elements that you see at Frog Song would be similar to what you're seeing in this ordinance. It's very close. But I don't know
Right.
about like the open space and, some of the details.
That's what I think that it's very, very similar. And one of the things that just on that question that Commissioner Rodriguez was bringing up of some facing the road and some facing the back, having friends and colleagues there, I know that they essentially have two sides.
Right.
The front and the back is almost like the front as well. So they have it's a pretty interesting arrangement that's there. I got another question about one of my favorite subjects, but it comes into the way that you're afraid to the extent feasible. And I agree with the analysis of reducing it and also having it on there. But in the section that looks at lot coverage, which is on the packet page 116, and it's G1D, you've basically got a tension in there that I'd like to bring out. You've got under lot coverage, you've got pathways to accommodate pedestrian and bicycle uses within the development shall not be counted in lot coverage calculations. And the very next wording then is, to the extent feasible, all driveways, parking areas, and pathways shall be constructed with pervious materials. And I'm just wondering, does it make sense in the sense that where there is a requirement to do stormwater type polishing, to have that sentence in there of that the pathways would not be included in that lot coverage calculations for impervious services? Why not take that sentence out altogether, which would be more in line, to the extent feasible, all driveways, parking areas, and pathways shall be constructed with pervious?
The reason it's that way is we are absolutely encouraging people to use pervious materials. there's going to be some places where you cannot use pervious materials. It's just either there's going to be too much moisture for that kind of development, or the weight loads are going to be too high. Or in some cases, it may just come down to costs and the ability to pencil out the project. We do recognize that these materials can be expensive right now. So we are encouraging it, and are going to try to look for it everywhere we can. At the same time, I did want to be clear that even if you did go with an asphalt with a community trail or a bike path, you are creating some impervious coverage, but not to the extent that you would if it were a major roadway or even large structures in terms of the impact on groundwater recharge. They tend to be 4 feet wide and not have the same kind of impact. As well, we didn't want to penalize in any kind of way pedestrian walkways through the development. So I don't want to get rid of one of them, because I think we do want to say that those aren't going to be counted in the coverage calculations, despite the surfacing that's used. But at the same time, we will be looking to encourage permeable materials where we can, in every place that we can. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And I would also, of some observations that I've seen elsewhere, is that where communities have had a concrete pathway, which is very typical, in a community, in a set of buildings and stuff, a common development, those start getting impacted by tree roots after a number of years and start becoming very costly. So I'm just sort of like thinking this is the wrong direction. If you had crushed granite type surfaces, they would be easier to maintain. And we just seem like it's pushing in the wrong direction as far as that. So
it's not certainly not intended to promote pavement over something like crushed, DG, decomposed granite, or anything like that. Yeah, that's certainly not the intent.
Is there any problem with removing that sentence on pathways to accommodate pedestrian and bicycle uses within the development shall not be counted? I mean, I know it's kind of giving a little bit there, but it's...
The reason, again, part of the reason is there, if I did that, then our code requires us to count any impermeable surface as land coverage.
Right.
And
Which is a beneficial thing for stormwater and for, I mean, we're trying to move in that direction generally.
Right.
So this is Noah. I'd just like to chime in. I will point out that it's relatively unique for a municipal code to count pavement towards lot coverage calculations. Usually lot coverage calculations are trying to anticipate structures, which is different than looking at the amount of impervious surfaces. And regardless of whether it's included or not, all impervious surfaces will have to be included in the stormwater calculations that are used to manage and treat stormwater per state law, and the requirements of being in the San Francisco Bay Area watershed.
So on that, because that's where I'm sort of thought the context was, when it says it's not counted on lot coverage calculations, it's still not counted for stormwater.
It would be counted for stormwater regardless of whether it's counted in lot coverage calculations.
Okay, I that's what I was really heading for and stuff. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Moving on to Commissioner Moore.
So I just had a couple clarifying questions on some of this. On page 18, it says, I guess I'm just need a little bit of clarification on this. on number 9, it says project does not include the removal of a native oak tree or development within the root zone. Can you clarify that, JP? Just that paragraph 9.
On packet page 18,
I think it's package. Yeah,
I think you might be looking at, hold on one second.
maybe I'm just looking at, I'm just looking at something that was the original draft.
I'm not sure.
This was right in the beginning of our packet.
And
Anyways,
okay.
it just had to deal with like tree removal and
I can see it on section on 9.
yeah.
Section 1. Can you repeat that, Commissioner?
So it says project does not include the removal of a native oak tree or development within the root zone of a native oak, black valley or live oak with a minimum circumference of 12 inches measured 54 inches above the natural grade.
Is there a packet page number and
18.
a bullet? Is it
9.
I found it.
Okay. And sorry,
I'm thinking that you're looking at the design guidelines that are coming up in the next.
Oh, maybe I am. Maybe I'm
Oh,
sorry.
but-
Maybe I am.
Oh, you know what? Why does this say packet page 18?
It does say packet page 18 down on
Yeah,
the.
maybe I'm just,
Oh, you know, something I think got messed up in the packet because, yeah, I would ask you to address that question to Joel later at the next
Okay.
session. Yeah, that's
Sorry.
on the design.
the packet, these packets a little,
I don't know how that would have happened.
They'll
It does say
jank right
packet
now,
page
so.
18. Yeah.
okay. All right, well, my questions really are kind of around that. So, all right. Well, I guess I don't have that many because I had some questions about the garbage and recycling because one of them said and again, I guess I'll just save this question for Joel when it comes to design.
If it is with respect to the design guidelines, then yes, do that. If we do have a statement about the screening of the garbage and
You
recycling.
do, and you had something about like crates in the.
I think that what came out of the design review guidelines that Joel's talking about.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
so those are the questions that I had. And just regard to when Neil was talking about co-housing, I find this more akin to Charles Street Village.
Very close.
When
Yeah.
I was looking at it, is because some of them face onto the street, but they also have those little side yards, and then they have that open space. So we actually kind of looked at that the other night again, and I thought it was very much kind of like what we were looking at here.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I have questions, but they're not for you.
okay, thank you, Commissioner Moore. And Vice Chair Lemus.
Hi, yes, I reviewed it and I didn't have questions, but maybe more of a comment. As I look at the proposed cottage housing ordinance, and then I read somewhere else that we haven't met for our area, the RENA requirements for housing. And is there developer interest in once this proposed cottage housing ordinance, is there interest in having these kind of infill projects? I mean, I'm just trying to see the other side of it, if there is interest in it.
Actually, yeah, if you look on this thank you page that's still up, that you can see Brian Flyhaven, he's been at all of our meetings except for tonight, but he's a developer who we've been working with a couple years, and currently his project is just the standard single family subdivision. But he's been interested in doing a different project like what we've been doing here, and so has been extremely patient while we work through the details and basically come up with an ordinance that would allow him to do this type of project. The short answer is yes, we do have some developer interest today who are waiting for this to come about so that they could do a project like this. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I didn't have any questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lemus. I wanted to say I really appreciate the thorough background and overview of this during the community meetings. I think I got a lot of my questions answered there, but one that I came up with this week was, because this is a unique development to me, I was curious, how do the community members share responsibility for things like landscaping or maintaining the areas? Is this through some sort of HOA or dues?
There is a requirement in the code that it doesn't define exactly what the mechanism would be. And we have to be careful because there's certain laws that we can't tread on. But they would have to form some sort of maintenance agreement or an HOA, but some sort of agreement that would address the maintenance of the common facilities, the landscaping, the parking, any commonly held building. There would have to be some mechanism, which is similar to a condominium development, where there is an HOA or some mechanism where that would provide for the common area maintenance. Yeah. And that item, if you are curious about it, I mean, it is in here. One of the last items on the page, it says the common area maintenance, that cottage housing development shall be required to implement a mechanism acceptable to the approval authority, which would be the planning commission, to ensure the continued care and maintenance of all common areas and amenities, including common open space, parking, surface water management facilities, and other common area or shared facilities. So it does require that there be some sort of mechanism in place. It would be up to the developer to determine exactly what that mechanism would be, and then it would be up to us to determine whether or not that's adequate.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you so much, JP and staff, for the very thorough opportunity and overview of this development. I feel like I have a good sense of what opportunity we have here. So I really appreciate that. With that, we will move into opening it up to the public for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. For our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon from your desktop or smart device. You can also dial *9 from just your telephone. Luke Lindenbush, go ahead.
Good evening, Commission, and thank you. I was just calling in to comment to reiterate generation housing support for the cottage housing ordinance resolution. We sent a letter to you this afternoon, and we just wanted to send this in because this is exactly the type of innovation that all of our cities need. And I think Cotati is especially proving that small cities across our county can take big steps to alleviate our housing crisis. So just wanted to reiterate that we are available to help make sure that this is implemented well and that this is a success for the city of Cotati, and look forward to seeing how it goes. So once again, just want to thank everybody who is involved in the project, all the architects, JP, Noah, and the commission for moving this forward. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Chair Murphy, it appears that will end public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. Then I'll turn it back over to the commission and ask if there are additional questions or comments. And we will start again with Commissioner Rodriguez. Did we lose Commissioner Rod? Oh, there we go. Commissioner Rodriguez, do you have any additional questions or comments?
Sorry, my connection's really bad tonight.
Okay.
I missed the part where Mr. Harris was talking about the pool.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you reminding me of that. JP, I think you were providing some feedback on Commissioner Rodriguez's original question regarding the forward-facing or the front of the houses and how those sort of requirements for a pool would impact that. Would you mind reiterating that response so that he can hear it?
Sure. The way the ordinance, the provision that Commissioner Rodriguez is looking at really relates to private properties and placing pools in your front yard of, let's just say, a standard subdivision home, single family home. It would not prevent a pool to be placed in a common area that has a home facing in that direction. So there's nothing that would prevent that. In fact, while it doesn't necessarily encourage pools, it does necessarily encourage homes to face out into these common areas where there's an expectation that there would be amenities out there. So, so no, it wouldn't prevent a pool from being in that central common area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for repeating that, JP. Any other questions, Rodriguez?
And then the pathways, I know that general plan says, to try and minimize pavement. What kind of pathways material were you looking at or trying to place instead?
Well, you and Commissioner Hancock seem to be right together on this one. So it doesn't actually define what pathway materials should use. It encourages the use of permeable pathways. There are a whole lot of different projects that can be used. In some cases, some people have mentioned the decomposed granite. Those can actually be just as impermeable because of the way that they require a heavy compaction as say asphalt, though they don't have the oils and other things that come with asphalt problems. But it does not define an actual use. It encourages the use of permeable materials, and those products are changing all the time. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from Commissioner Hancock?
Just a comment that it's great to see this project moving forward. Seems like it would be a benefit to the spectrum of housing within Cotati. I personally like the way that the ADUs and the JADUs have been incorporated into it. And I know that's a mandatory side of things, but it gives options for the community as things are moved forward. I like the fact that there's a variety of housing that could be in there. And so, yes, I'm supportive of it.
Thank you. Moving on to Commissioner Moore.
My questions are actually more for the design standards.
Okay, great. We will wait for that. And Vice Chair Lemus.
No questions, but thank you very much to staff for all their work on this.
Great, thank you so much. And I will add that it's exciting to see this new opportunity come to Cotati. We've seen a lot of different examples of what could come to fruition here. So I look forward to working on this more, hopefully in the near future, if this can actually come to fruition. With that, I believe we need a motion.
I can move to approve it.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I'm going to go off of mute, but do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
I've motioned. It needs a second.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Can we get a roll call?
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Hancock,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lemus,
Yes.
Chair Murphy.
Yes. And Carrie, I apologize, but do we need to read the resolution title in order for that to be on the record?
I will defer to Community Development Director Noah Hausch.
Just to clarify, Commissioner Hancock's motion was to adopt the resolution as proposed, correct?
Correct.
That's adequate for the requirements for the motion.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next we will move on to the next agenda item. Excuse me while I pull up my paperwork here, and this is the objective design standards.
Thank you, Senior Planner Joel Galbraith, who joined the city kind of recently to help assist us with processing some of the policy work as well as some uptick in development interest. We'll be presenting this item. And we also have principals from Archaeologics, Mitch Connor and Peter Stanley in attendance who can, they took the time to review these proposed design standards or guidelines through the design review administration process. And so they are here to provide their insights as practicing architects to kind of give us some input from the private side as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Joel.
Okay, hi. I'm sharing JP's computer, so I had some computer glitches of my own. So I apologize.
No problem.
Not surprising to know, I don't think. The item before you is the objective design standards. Next, and this is a planning commission workshop. Next slide, please. The recommended action is to receive the presentation from staff on the objective design standards, take public comment, deliberate, and provide input to staff. Next slide. To give you some background, in 2017, Governor Brown passes SB 2, Senate Bill 2, Building Homes and Job Act. And that provided a recording fee of $75 on properties sold in California. And that money was to provide assistance to cities to streamline housing. Next slide, please. Some more background. In 2018, SV Senate, which is Senate Bill 35, goes into effect, and that streamlines qualifying multifamily projects. Only building permits are required subject to objective design standards. The city of Cotati was awarded $160,000 from SB 2 toward the development of objective design standards. Next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of today's study session, number one, is to provide an overview of objective residential design standards, describe the process so far, discuss the draft standard, facilitate questions, and the Planning Commission should provide input, as well as hopefully we'll get some, I'll go over the public input we have so far. Next slide, please. So what are objective design standards? And these are standards that they require no personal or subjective judgment, and they're verifiable by reference to known criteria. That's basically, they can be counted or they can be measured. And everybody agrees on what that would be because it requires no judgment. So what's driving the issue for these standards is the Housing Accountability Act and SB 35 and the need for additional housing supply and increased affordability. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of these objective design standards? They provide clarity for residential developers and applicants, provides more certainty for project approval, provides increased clarity for residents about what type of development could occur in their neighborhoods. Next slide, please. how can we address objective standards? In standards, these standards are derived from past practices, and that means existing Cotati standards and guidelines. Also, the typical conditions of approval, and converting design requiring design requirements that replace guidelines. Next slide, please. So these are typical objective development standards that you would see in the zoning code to give you an idea kind of the difference between design standards and objective standards. So typically, if you're measuring height or a setback or parcel size, those are measured, you can measure those with a scale, you can count parking spaces. So these are objective standards that anybody should be able to agree on by measuring and counting. Next slide, please. So when we get into objective design standards, the design is the critical point, and typically these, generally when you're reviewing projects, these require judgment to determine if the massing is appropriate, if it's articulated, if it's does it have too many blank walls, what about the building materials, what about roof lines, windows, how does the building look? And those typically require judgment. So the goal of this is to come up with standards that do not require judgment, but they can be measured and counted. Next slide, please. So the building on the left, that might be a type of building you might have received prior to having any design guidelines or any design review board. And if you didn't have any kind of objective design standards, this is a project that might meets the building height, meets the setbacks. And so this type of project on the left was something that we want to avoid by coming up with objective design standards, because we cannot have a process for all projects that require discretionary action with judgment. So the goal is to come up with standards that would avoid this type of development. Next slide, please. And this would be an example on the left of a project, also the one on the right, of projects that do provide articulation, appropriate massing, and architectural detail. So the goal is to come up with objective standards that would create more of this type of a project than the previous one. Next slide, please. So at this point, Cotati must provide a by right residential development option. And applicants still can request different standards. If they request different standards, then they must go through Cotati's typical discretionary design review process. Next slide. So there are significant challenges in coming up with these standards. So the first challenge is reduce decision-making discretion. So there's much less discretion, if any, in this process, and that's a difficult thing to come up with. When projects do go through this process, there's no public input on development projects. If they meet all of the objective design and development standards, there may be public notification, but there would not be an opportunity for input into the process once the standards are established. And in establishing these standards, they should be realistic, acceptable, effective, and fair. Next slide, please. So this is the project overview. The objective standards would be incorporated into Cotati's zoning ordinance. They would apply to new qualifying multifamily projects proposed within Cotati. They would be shaped by Cotati's zoning ordinance, general plan, existing guidelines and input from residents, local design and planning firms, and city staff. Next slide, please. So the project process where we're at so far. So we started researching in November of last year. We started community engagement with a visual preference survey in December and January of this year. Draft standards were referred to Archaeologics for review and comment. And tonight is the Planning Commission study session. And after tonight's meeting, the goal is to have to review and refine the draft standards that would occur in the spring of this year. And hopefully, depending how things go, there'll be public review and adoption by the Planning Commission and City Council in spring and summer of this year. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over the visual preference survey that was conducted. So there were a survey was, a link was in the one of our news, I think the January newsletter from the city. A lot of people responded to that. We had 75 individuals who participated in the survey, and they were given 16 examples of a variety of housing projects and types and styles in Sonoma County. They're asked to rate the quality of the design, and they also could make individual comments about what they liked or disliked about the development. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through the 16 examples and just let you know why they were chosen and how they were rated by the participants of the survey. So example number one, this is an affordable project in Santa Rosa, and this one was chosen for the survey. Basically, it's individual units with individual styles, and what's unique about this project is that they don't have a typical front porch. They have a front patio is their entry, and in the back, you can't see this, but it's basically access from an alley to garages. So this is basically their entry and private open space. So that makes this project somewhat unique, and this one rated fairly highly by the participants of the survey. Next slide, please. Example number two is a more modern style. This is in Santa Rosa. This is 3 stories, stacked flats with a butterfly roof. And I would say generally the modern styles, such as this one, generally respondents felt maybe they even liked the design of the building, but some of them felt this maybe did not fit in with the small town character of Cotati. Next slide, please. Okay, example number 3, this is in Santa Rosa, and this one was chosen. It's a townhouse style project with, I think this particular building has 3 units. It's part of a bigger complex. What's somewhat unusual about this one is the parking is directly off the street, 2 one-car garages, and also has small porches. And this is the type of project you might see on an infill site where there's not room to get parking to the back. And the only way to access the parking is from the front. So this was somewhat unusual. This project basically tied for the top ranking that was preferred by the participants. And generally had to do, people thought this would generally kind of fit in with the character of Cotati. Next slide, please. This is a project, affordable housing project in Rohnert Park. And in the front building of this project, there was a mixed use part of it with residential up above, and below basically the mixed use portion is commercial and offices below. And this was chosen also too because it's a different style. It's a flat roof. It's more kind of contemporary, has kind of a Southwest theme. And generally, participants did not feel this style really fit into Cotati. It's unusual style, but so it basically came out in a neutral overall. Next slide, please. This building was chosen. This is also part of an affordable housing project in Petaluma. This one was chosen. It's a very unusual design. Commercial on the bottom, it's mixed use with residential up above. And even though this has a lot of variation, the roof line and projections, just the way it was designed and maybe the scale of it, it did not do very well in the survey. Next slide, please. This is an affordable housing project in Windsor. And this one did fairly well for a relatively large building. It's part of a larger complex. And this one was chosen basically for how they did the massing of the building. It's a 3-story building. And there was an effort made to break up the massing of the building by using projections to make the building look smaller. So that's one of the standards we'll be talking about is massing, and that's why this one was chosen. You were making an effort to reduce the mass of this relatively large building. Next page, please. This is a project in Petaluma fronting a major street, and it was selected for the survey. Basically had porches, front entries. It was more of a traditional style, and this project did fairly well in the survey. Next slide. This is an affordable project near downtown Santa Rosa, and it's more of a, you'd call a mid-rise building with space on the lower floor for offices and commercial. And this project maybe I think did about I think that was the least favored by the participants, or close to the least. So generally the participants did not feel this fit into the scale, a small town scale of Cotati. Next slide, please. This is an affordable project in Santa Rosa, and for a relatively large project, this one actually favored pretty well with the participants. It has a variety of, it's kind of a modern style, but also has traditional elements. It has front porches, but they're not raised, they're at ground level. It has a variation in height, and also they preserve the existing trees in front there. And so this one rated fairly well by the participants. Next slide, please. This is in an affordable project in Santa Rosa, and this one was selected because it's a more modern style with a flat roof. It's 3 stories. They've made an effort to break up the mass of the building also with projections and using different materials and colors and decks. And this one rated fairly well for the size of a building. Next slide, please. This is an example of a townhouse project in Santa Rosa, and it was selected. Basically, it's a different architectural style. It's not typical for Northern California. It's a more Mediterranean Spanish style. It did fairly well, and it has porches and front patios. However, quite a few respondents felt this style did not really fit into the character. They liked the building, but not so much the architectural style. Next slide, please. And hopefully all of you know where this project is. It's in Cotati, and this one is on Wilford. And this actually rated #1 by the survey participants. And generally they preferred this style, the townhouse, traditional elements, the porches, the craftsman style. So this one was highly favored by the participants. Next slide, please. This is a more modern project, higher density, taller project in Petaluma. Quite a few respondents actually liked the style, liked the density. However, they did not see how this would fit in Cotati. Next slide, please. This is a mixed-use development near downtown Santa Rosa with 3 stories of apartments above retail on the ground floor. This project's been there about 20 years, and this one was shown because oftentimes mixed-use projects have not favored well as far as the retail. So this building's been there about 20 years, and as far as I know, there's never been a single tenant in the bottom floor. That's always remained vacant for various reasons because of how the spaces were designed and where the building's located. And oftentimes there's not a market for the commercial and retail in specific locations. And this type of project did not do well in the survey. I think part of its size generally, and how it would fit into Cotati. Next slide, please. Of the mixed-use projects in the survey, this one favored the best. This is in the theater district outside of downtown Petaluma, and has more of a traditional style. And I think just the scale of the building and just the way the retail's done the bottom floor and the awnings, I think generally that's probably the reason why this one favored better as far as a mixed use development. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last example. This is a project in Santa Rosa. This project was chosen for the survey mainly to see how people would react to the 2-car garage and lots of pavement facing the street. And lots of people actually like the 2-car garages. It was nice to have a 2-car garage. However, people felt that the appearance from the street was not, did not really fit into the neighborhood. However, so it did, I guess, in the middle when it came to the survey. Next slide, please. So that concludes the survey. We'll go on to the proposed amendments. So what's being proposed is a process that's ministerial and by right. And the applicants need to choose the process. It's not an automatic process. They need to request this process. And if the developer does request this process, the project must comply with all state requirements as well as all Cotati adopted objective development and design standards. Next slide, please. So this is a proposed application review process that we would anticipate how this could occur. There's more than one way to do it, but this is probably the most likely way it could happen. The applicants would request a streamlined process. They would submit plans and a checklist. And the checklist they would demonstrate how they're meeting all of our objective design standards. Staff would review their plans and the checklist to verify that the proposed project complies with all state and city objective design standards within the specified time limits. Staff would approve the project without a public hearing. The applicant may then apply for building permit, and generally public notification would be on the city's website and or notice of project approval. Next slide. So I'm going to go over this as a kind of a summary of the proposed amendments. You have the draft, which is more detailed in your packets, but this is a summary of the major points that are included. And they're divided up into sections. The first section is neighborhood compatibility. And I would say this is probably one of the hardest sections to come up with objective standards. And based upon comments in the surveys, we try to come up with standards that would work. And this is a process, and so we're looking for a lot of feedback, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback on these. But this is kind of the first take on what we've come up with so far. And for neighborhood compatibility, the number one thing would be to orient buildings to the street. So that means if you're not backing up to the street, you're not putting the parking lots at the street, you're orientating the building and its entrances and windows to the street. So basically the building is fronting on the street. And the second one is to require sloped or gabled roofs when the project is along the same frontage or across the street from single family homes. And this is coming basically from the survey where people were looking at projects that they thought would fit into their neighborhoods. And generally these projects, if they're proposed, would be on more smaller infill sites within or adjacent to existing neighborhoods. And generally the responses we had that flat roofs and more modern projects were not as compatible as the more traditional styled projects. So the goal of this standard was to come up with what you see from the street, that you'd be basically seeing from what you'd see from the street would be sloped and gabled roofs. It doesn't mean the project could not have any flat roofs, but what you would be seeing from the street would be sloped or gabled roofs. And also in situations where you have a 3-story building, like on the example to the right in that photo, that's in Cotati, where that 3 stories backing up or siding onto single family homes, it would be that 3rd story would be set back 30 feet, just the 3rd story portion. The next category is building design. So the way these design objective standards are written, there's not a specific architectural style required. Some cities do require specific architectural styles, such as Santa Barbara. It's basically a Spanish colonial style. In South Lake Tahoe, they're looking for something called a mountain style. These standards proposed here do not require a specific architectural style. They do require four-sided architecture. That means that architecture and details go around to all sides, at least the majority of them, the major components. It's using multiple materials to break up the massing of the building, making it look more interesting, minimizing blank walls to no greater than length of 30 feet, using window trim or recess the windows by 3 inches. In areas where you're doing a flat roof building, it can be 75% flat, but the goal is to have some gabled or sloped roofs on at least 25% of the building. The goal is to include front porches and entry patios. This is cases where you have the front of units, ground floor units facing the street. Those entrances would have front porches or entry patios. It would be similar to the example that you see to the right in the photo. It would prohibit T111 panel siding and also EFIS siding. And generally, the reason for this is these sidings generally have a reputation for not holding up well over time. And the goal is to come up, hopefully have more materials that are longer lasting and more affordable in the long run. Next slide, please. Massing articulation, and the goal of these standards is to break up the size of the building, in case, especially when you have larger buildings. And that's by including balconies, bay windows, individualized entries, require building offsets every 50 feet with an 18-inch offset, 20 feet in length for the full height of the building. That's similar to the example that we showed previously, the example that was in Windsor. And also to vertically articulate roof lines every 50 feet. So there's variation in the roof line. Next slide, please. The standards also include open space and landscape, and that's generally requiring private and common open space in projects and to preserve existing oak trees. Outdoor lighting would require lighting along walkways and driveways. Site design would require street extensions where they're shown on adopted plans. Dwellings would overlook open space to create defensible space. Garages and carports shall include architectural elements from the main building. Parking shall be screened. And to preserve and restore historic buildings as part of the project. Next slide, please. Accessory elements, these would include screening roof equipment and trash containers, provide dumpsters for 5 or more units, include outside storage for each unit, provide laundry facilities in each unit. Also, there's some specific standards for mixed use projects. So for vertical mixed use, residential units would be on the 2nd floor and higher. Horizontal mixed use, the majority of the street frontage would be for commercial uses. And a minimum of 25% of the floor area of the project would be for commercial. And provide pedestrian connections between all uses within the project. Next slide. So the proposed standards were referred to Archeologics for review and comment. I know Peter Stanley is here to offer maybe some additional feedback, but we discussed the standards where they had questions or concerns or issues. So I'm going to go over generally what those were. So one of the issues discussed was limits on flat roofs, and it was thought that possibly that would limit creativity, and also issues with reducing density when you have a limited roof. The zoning has a limited height, and a flat roof allows more efficient use to possibly get more units within that height limit. There was some concern with the 3rd story being set back 30 feet. And that was a concern possibly on smaller sites where that may not be possible. There was concerns on limit on the siting. There seemed to be agreement that prohibiting T111 was appropriate. However, there was concern about limiting other types of siting as the quality has improved over the years, and there may be additional improvements. So we should really look at if we really want to limit siting other than T111. There was concern with front porches and entries, requiring them. There was concern, I think part of it had to do with the cost, partly had to do with access, especially if you have stoops or stairs, you need ramps up to a porch. And also there's some questions whether these porches and patios in the front would actually get used. So are the benefits worth the cost, basically? The next issue, there was discussion about massing and building offsets. And that's to minimize the size appearance of the building. However, the offsets do come with a cost. They do affect the floor plan. I was talking with the planner in Santa Rosa where a project had been approved using similar standards, and the developer wanted to come back and change this requirement, which they couldn't do because the project was approved and they met the standard. They could not change it, and it had to do with trying to cut the cost of the project. And so having the offsets does increase cost, and it limits the floor plan. So there's less flexibility with having this requirement. Common private open space. We had lots of discussions about that. It's been important in Cotati for units to have quite a bit of common space and private space, generally because our densities are lower than in other communities, as we're a small town character. There was concern about the amount that was being required, whether that was really feasible and appropriate and cost efficient. And that was something we need to spend more time looking at to see if what's being proposed is really realistic. We had lots of discussion. I know there's some discussion on the previous item regarding this item regarding trash and recycling containers. And this is a work in progress on this issue because it is evolving. I'm trying to come up with a standard that would handle kind of every type of project, dealing with dumpster enclosures, locations, accessibility to the dumpsters, dealing with on smaller projects, dealing with the roller bins and where are those stored. And so this is a complicated issue, and I'm sure we'll be getting some more comments on that. And also that's one of those we'll be spending more time on to come up with a standard that's really workable. And I'm sure there will not be a one size fits all, but having different standards that maybe a developer could pick from based upon their type of project. Mixed use, the standard is 25% of the project would need to be commercial. That's a minimum, and there is a concern, and I understand the concern that may be too high based upon the current climate and the generally reduction. Am I still on? So that needs to be looked at whether that is realistic, because as I think we've all seen, that the demand for commercial may not be there for that amount of commercial. Next slide, please. I think, am I gone?
You are.
We can still hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting little messages now. I can't read the PowerPoint, but maybe I can get out of it. Hang on here. Okay, I think I'm back to normal here. Okay, the other item on the agenda is something you may not be familiar with, but we're going to cover this briefly. These are called small cell networks. It's a completely different topic. So what we're starting to see, these are becoming more common in the larger cities, and they haven't really come to Cotati yet, but we want to get ahead of this. And so this example, you see the photo, that's actually in Santa Rosa. So what we're starting to see is to fill in the gaps for providing data within our networks of cell systems is these what are called small cells, such as the one on the right. These are attached typically to wooden PG&E poles. They also can be incorporated into steel streetlights and traffic lights. Under state law, if they're in the public right of way and they're on a PG&E pole, a wooden PG&E pole, the city has no control. PG&E must allow them, the city must allow them. By right, they do not need city permits, but the goal is to come up with some guidelines to give them guidance. And so hopefully if they do come in, these come into Cotati, we could give them guidance, because generally most utilities do want to accommodate cities' preferences as much as they can. If it's on a city facility, such as a city steel streetlight, which I think we have some in some traffic lights, the city would have control over those. But for the ones that are on the wooden PG&E poles, we have basically no control. So the goal is to come up with some standards for the ones the city has control over, is also the ones for PG&E poles as guidance. Next slide, please. So these are some draft standards to give guidance, and that is to equipment shall be minimized and match the color of the pole. Example to the right, that's basically a brown pole with gray equipment. Since this photo was taken, they've actually painted the equipment to match the pole. So the equipment's now brown and the pole is brown. So that's basically what happens with that standard is at least a color match. The goal is also to have equipment should be flush and screened as much as possible. Hopefully with the technology changes that will occur more, because as you can see, the equipment on this pole is really not flush, but I've seen some where it's extended out even farther than this one. Typically these have also ground mounted equipment, which you can see at the bottom. At the pole, there's ground mounted equipment. So the goal is to minimize that by placing it underground or having it at least back behind the sidewalk and screened. And in some cases, some communities are looking at possibly opening those up to murals on the cabinets if they can't be screened. Next slide. So the meeting actions for tonight is to review the information provided and the community input, solicit feedback from fellow commissioners, and commissioners should provide input to staff. Next slide. And at this point, are there any questions?
And just before we move on to questions, this is Noah Hausch. I just want to reiterate, so we're making this proposal in response to state law that's existing right now, that and SB 35 is one of those regulations, and there's some laws around telecommunication facilities that allows developers and telecommunication companies to come in and go straight to building permits, or in some cases not even get building permits, to construct relatively large apartment projects and these telecommunication facilities. And so what we're trying to do is get in front of those allowances by having some minimum set of standards that we can apply through the existing law in order to try to push those designs into something that's more in keeping with the community of Cotati. So just understand that's why this is coming to you. Staff is not proposing to make these projects ministerial. They already are, and so we're reacting to that. And then just to remind you, we do have Mitch Connor and Peter Stanley here who can provide some input kind of from the public side and from the developer side of folks who actually build buildings and get projects accomplished and have had to jump through some of these hoops with those projects.
Thank you for the clarification, Noah. We'll open it up to questions and comments from the commissioners. And I will start with Commissioner Rodriguez.
I don't have questions right now. My connection's really bad, so I'm kind of afraid if I answer or ask something, I'm gonna miss the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're always kind of doing the best we can in the current circumstances. I would just say that we'll loop back around. And so if you do think of something, please feel free to ask it. So I will move on to Commissioner Hancock. And just a reminder, when we're asking our questions, we may want to specify if we're referring to the objective design standards or the small cell networks. Would the standards be for both the small cell networks and the multi-housing developments?
Would they be for both?
Yes.
They would probably be in two different places in the city code.
Okay, perfect. Then just a reminder to specify which you're asking questions about. So Commissioner Hancock.
Yes, thank you. Well, just to play devil's advocate on that a little bit, to ask the same question about both of them. And I think you brought it up with the telecom equipment, that some places were looking at some murals. And I know that's been very popular in some areas that I've been in, that you've got cabinets that essentially become a decorative feature. And also to bring that up with the, just to put it in the context, the community context, there was that reference to blank walls within the development, the multifamily standards, that should not be more than 30 feet of a blank wall. But if that's a blank wall that's facing a street or a public area, is there a way of phrasing it that perhaps could be available for a public art display, should there be a community body that wants to or proposes to be able to do something with that? So a general question about art, community art, should there be bodies within the city or community groups of some sort that could facilitate that? Is that something that could be built in? Or
Noah, do you have a
Yeah, I do think if the so again, the intent of those limitations is to just to provide some visual interest, architectural interest. But to your point, I think if there was a reason that necessitated a blank wall, giving that kind of relief valve to that design to then say, okay, look, we have to have it be 35 or 40 feet. The standard says 30, but we would propose to use it as a mural location or an art installation location or something, as a way to provide some community benefit, have it fit into the context of the community, but still meet their design needs for the project. I do think that's definitely an option that we could have.
good, thank you. I think that would be a benefit, because a lot of communities are doing it in various forms, and it does break up some of the monotonous, whether it be equipment or other things that are around. So in terms of the actual multifamily housing, I see that it could go from two houses upwards. Would that be something that could incorporate two small properties, sections? I just happen to know that there are some properties that are very, historically have just been these very small properties, and they seem like lot lines. They seem like that maybe if somebody decided to get both of them, would that fit into this criteria as well?
You mean I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean two single family detached homes?
Well, I'm really saying two lots that are already considered separate lots.
Right. If you want to combine those two lots into one project for multiple units.
That's the question, yes.
Yes, they could, yes.
So they could do that if they acquired both lots. And,
yes.
And then that way they could build something that's on there. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Commissioner Moore.
So I just had a couple of questions on these set designs for projects that come in. there's really just no flexibility left at all for like this is all going to be across the desk for us. So whatever standards we put in as a commission and council, that's what's going to be held to.
Well,
Am I correct?
the way it would work is the developer has to choose the process. And if a developer, if he doesn't want to meet all the criteria, all the objective standards, he doesn't have to meet, he does not have to go through the process. So there may be projects, they can't meet it, they don't qualify for this process, and they would go through the normal discretionary process going to the planning commission, as they normally would. Probably only a minority of development projects, multifamily, would meet this criteria and go through this process.
Okay. So I had a question on, obviously, the garbage and recycling portion of this. So anything over 5 units is going to be subject to SB 1383 with California state law. And so you're going to have to include compost, recycling, and garbage. So just in the languages, it says garbage recycling. So I just know that needs to be included. And then there was something about crates in a, I don't even know what that means.
I think that, yeah, so the issue that's coming up on some of these smaller projects is dealing with the different kinds of recycling and garbage and all things that need to be dealt with. So I think the goal is to come up with different ways of doing it and allowing flexibility. So I think what we need to do on that particular item is really look at all the alternatives and all the current laws exactly, and to come up with something that will work in different cases. So I don't have a good answer on how this is all going to work, but it's an issue that, talking with Peter Stanley and others, that we need to do more work on that one. So it makes more sense. It's easier to read and needs a lot of clarification, and to make sure it's consistent with all the current laws.
Okay, and on that, I had a question about the project is not, it's about tree removal of native oaks. Can you kind of clarify that?
The goal of that is, if you're removing a native oak, it's a tree that would normally require a tree removal permit, a discretionary process, then you cannot use this process. If you're going to remove an oak tree that would normally require a permit, then you have to go through the normal discretionary process.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Did you, I had one more question, sorry. My notes are all on here. So I had a question about if they did go through the discretionary process, you said, so there's no public review on this. So is there noticing neighbors if a project is going in? Because I know right now you have to do a 500-foot notice for at least a project that goes in. Is that still required?
It would not be, it's not required by state law. So state law, if you just go with state law, requires no public notification. What other cities are doing, like what Santa Rosa is doing, they've done 3 of these. They do no notification at all, any mail outs. They just have a website where they have these, all the projects listed and all the information there on the website.
And that works for them.
That's what they're doing. Doesn't mean,
yikes.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They don't have to do that, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So what we've talked about doing here is doing that. Plus, after the project gets its approval, there would be a notice of project approval that would go out to the public.
And
yeah, I guess they don't know what Cotati's all about, because this is, I mean, the first project that goes through like this, you're going to have torches and pitchforks down at City Hall. I mean, and I'm just doing worst case scenario, because I've been through some of these projects where they've been very controversial. And even when they've gotten built, through all the process and all of the design and everything, you know, for a lot, they still have been, it's been a hard project to get through some of these. So it's just, it's an interesting process. I've never, I mean, this is so new to, as a planning commissioner for so long, to see something that's just somebody can go through and not have any public input on a big project is kind of unheard of. So.
And Commissioner Moore, I will react to that because it's absolutely correct. So this is an example of the state taking away local discretion in an effort to try to, from their perspective, streamline the development process and get more projects built, more homes built. I will also say, if an SB 35 project came to town, it would be very controversial because it would be a large apartment project. That's what these are. These are large tower apartment projects because there's so many other criteria they have to meet. The only way that these projects pencil is if it's a large project with a lot of units. So the thing that we struggle with as staff is somebody going to get more frustrated by getting a letter that says, hey, this project's not approved yet, but you can't give us any opinion on it? Or do you want to just know once it's approved, here's what you're going to get? And sorry, you didn't get a chance to tell us your opinion on it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer on that, but I did have one other comment about the guidelines for the poles and the cell units. So I know a long time ago that came before us when they were doing like the trees, you know, the cell towers that look like trees. They're supposed to look like trees. That was like the new thing. And then things that look like rocks in your front yard that are supposed to cover up like the Comcast stuff. So I would prefer if we did do some kind of mural painting other than trying to do some kind of fake tree or rock in the front. I like that we have some of those paintings. I don't know if they're the city, you know, approves of them, but they're down at the park. There's a couple of them in town already that I appreciate. So anyways, those are my comments, but thank you so much. I know the trash thing is definitely a work in progress. I'm working on those daily on different laws. So I can appreciate that it is definitely a changing climate right now with all three having to be put into enclosures. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Vice Chair Lemus.
Thank you. So I did have a few questions, and one of my questions, well, first of all, I just want to support what Commissioner Hancock, Commissioner Moore talked about murals, because I think it adds a lot of value, culture, respect, I think, to a community. So I think I just want to throw in my support for that as well, for any walls or any of these small cell containers. About the small cell personal wireless facilities, I don't know if we have any in the community yet, but I'm wondering if there's any kind of say that we have as far as how far up they should be, and any kind of transparency for the community about, I don't know, any radio waves that it emits or anything. I don't know if that's, if there's that kind of transparency information that these organizations or these companies are providing to us.
Can we go back a slide, maybe? Can we go back one slide on the PowerPoint?
Yes, just 1 second.
Okay.
So I was just, concerned and had a question about that. So I'll wait until, okay.
Maybe go back another slide. Maybe a couple. Okay, there we go.
Mhm.
So on the PG&E poles, which most of these are, on the wooden PG&E poles, we have no say whatsoever.
Okay.
Cotati does not.
Mhm.
Basically, the way it works is under state law, PG&E has no say. If the provider wants to put this equipment on their pole, by state law they can, provided they show that the pole is strong enough for the equipment, and they may need to put in a new pole. But they need to comply with laws on the radio frequency they're not city laws, but state and federal laws on that. But we would have technically no say on the PG&E poles. If it's on a city pole, which aren't that many in Cotati, I don't think that would work. We would have say on those.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's any kind of input that we as a city could have as far as the range. Like you said, there's some sort of a range on as
Well,
far as how far up.
I know what they were doing. Santa Rosa's been getting a lot of these, and what they were doing on the ones they had control of, which in Santa Rosa they have actually quite a few poles with street lights on them, and that gives them control. But they were looking at standards for radio frequencies and how tall they are and where they're pointed and things like that. So it's possible to come up with a process to review those and notification if the city has control of them. I think in Cotati, I'm not sure how many we have yet, but it's probably not that many. And these are typically spread around the city. I think Santa Rosa maybe has 20 some of these throughout the city. So they're not real common, but the ones you see are generally this type on the wooden PG&E poles.
Okay. So I'd like to put a pin in that one. Maybe we can get more information. And then my other question was about, in one of your slides, you talked about specific design is not required, but how do we ensure that it's going to fit into the neighborhood? Because I did see on one of your pages that there is a neighborhood compatibility, but in your slide it said that a specific design is not required. So my question was, how do we ensure that it's going to fit into the neighborhood? That it's not going to be something that stands out apart from everything else that's around it.
Right. So there's no specific style required. So when this was starting, we looked at, do we want to require a style? Because we could. And the style that came up most frequently was a craftsman style. So then if you had standards that were list craftsman style elements that they had to include, we can do that. This is not proposing that, but it's something that could be proposed. So this, I would say the goal is to allow flexibility, creativity, but have a certain amount of elements that would, with the roughs not being all flat, that would be more compatible than if you had no standards at all. So it's a balance. It's a balancing act between having no set style and having some standards. So it's a balancing act there.
And that was where my question was. I wasn't sure if there was like a checklist or a certain point once they come up with their elements, whether we would have a say or a check into, does it fit more or less into the neighborhood?
I would say the way these standards are proposed, it's not. They have to meet these standards, but I guess it would be up to somebody's judgment.
The whole
fit or not.
The whole intent of these is to take out the question of does it fit? Like the state is directing us to say you need a checklist and it needs to say yes or no, not a judgment call. And I will say we talked about potentially trying to mandate some craftsman elements. The issue with that is these are likely to be large buildings, and craftsman architecture is not a large building architecture. It's a single family architecture generally. And so what we didn't want to do is write some guidelines that are, or objectives that are so prescribed that somebody could do a design that checks all the boxes, but it's frankly terrible. Completely out of context. And I think the example that Joel showed from Petaluma of the kind of gabled roofs that marched taller and taller up into the sky until it was 4 or 5 floors is a good example of something that could probably check a lot of boxes with articulation and varied roof interests and all these things, but frankly is not a design that you would ever want to prescribe.
Okay, so other than I'm just learning more about this, and so I look forward to learning more and hearing more. Those are my comments for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lemus. I have a few questions and comments, some of which were just answered specifically on the architectural style. It made me a little nervous to see that we don't have that, but I do understand that very strict guidelines could lead us down a road that we didn't anticipate. So I'll be curious to see, as we work through this, if we're able to kind of refine some sort of guidance that will help ensure we feel comforted that we won't end up with some of those examples. I didn't see a lot that I thought fit into Cotati. I was wondering what the purpose of the survey was. Before I asked questions about it, I was wondering, is that just to see if something came out of that that would help us build out these standards, or what was the goal that we were hoping to get back from that?
The goal was to see what I think was generally acceptable to residents of Cotati. And if there was something that obviously wasn't acceptable, maybe we'd try to have standards that would preclude that or discourage that, or to look at what design elements people liked and thought would be compatible with the character of Cotati.
Okay.
So it was basically just kind of judging how people felt about different styles. So the goal was to look at a variety of styles and housing types just to get people's reaction.
I see. Thank you. Some of the items that you mentioned, I was confused if it was a requirement as part of the Senate bill, or something that we were implementing as a recommendation for our standards. So for example, you mentioned the 25% mixed use. And I wasn't sure if that's something that we're required to have mixed use, or that staff is recommending would be a good idea.
So mixed use is not required on every project. There may be some zoning districts and things or specific plans where mixed use is required, but it's not required for every project.
Okay. And then similarly, are we required to have 3-story buildings, or is that something we could put in a standard where we wouldn't allow it to go above 2 stories?
Well, I need to double check. I think I heard somebody say that the bill requires 3 stories. I could not confirm that it does. So I would say at this point, it's typically regulated by the zoning district that it's in.
Okay.
So they could vary depending on the zoning district. I need to confirm that. But it's not my understanding that it's necessarily requires it to be 3 stories but it could be an option depending on the zoning district.
Yeah, well, and I'll chime in with that. It's my understanding that a developer could propose to go to 3 stories and the city could not say no in certain instances. And then separately, with regards to mixed use, some of our zoning districts, and specifically the downtown, require new development to be mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
And so we responding to a mandate from the state that says, city, you have to allow certain projects to go just to straight building permits, no CEQA, no public review, none of that. But also knowing that our own code will require mixed use in certain instances, we were trying to respond to those 2 mandates to come up with something that would fit both. And the 25% does come straight out of our zoning code for mixed use projects.
Okay.
Oh, could I add something? No.
Uh-huh.
This is Peter Stanley, one of the principals of Archaeologics, and I definitely think it would help the conversation to hear directly from Mitch and Peter.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you for having us here tonight. And this is a good, robust conversation about a very complicated topic. And I think part of what Mitch and I were looking at was sometimes the unintended consequences of trying to protect one element and ending up with something that you don't want through somewhat of a more objective standard. I will say to Chair Murphy's question about can you cap it at 2 or 3 stories, one of the things to keep in mind is that this is also about getting affordable housing into the marketplace and meeting the RHNA standard targets for your community. And by doing that, you also get density bonus, or a developer coming into your community will get density bonus concessions, which may be height. And so it's sort of keeping in mind that there are a lot of mechanisms in place that have been put in place by the state, and that you now are having to sort of analyze and see how it keeps into the context of your own community. But there are already state mechanisms outside of SB 35 and other state mandates that would allow a developer to put more density into a project. So then I would think what you would want to be looking at as a commission is, okay, if that's going to happen, then how is it that we can sort of maintain the context and texture of our community?
Thank you. That's very helpful. I have a couple other questions, and then I have a comment on that. My other question was just to further understand that this would, when I was reading through SB 35 and just trying to kind of capture when we would come across this situation. So could you explain one more time, what would be an example of when we would come across this situation? Is it only for something like an apartment complex? I heard Commissioner Hancock mentioned probably a very unique situation where we only had 2 residents, but just trying to, again, wrap my head around when this would be a circumstance where we could utilize these standards.
Well, it's a case where a developer would choose to use these standards because he wants more certainty and a quicker process. So if for some developers, that's very important to save money, is the certainty and quick process. So a developer could choose to design to this, would be multifamily. And typically these would be infill sites that are vacant. Because if they've had, this is one thing that's unusual about the law, if it's a critical habitat site, which is California tiger salamander, if it's a critical habitat like that, they cannot use these standards because that goes through CEQA. So these are typically projects that would be exempt from CEQA. So it's infill sites, generally surrounded by development. It's multifamily. They're doing affordable housing units. They may be asking for density bonuses, and they're looking for a quick process and get in for certainty. And they would propose this process if they meet all the objective standards. A lot of projects will not meet all that criteria. They'll go through the normal process.
And just to clarify, it's not only for affordable housing. And I guess the reason I asked is because we were just talking about the cottage housing. So I'm trying to differentiate the two, but this could be for any kind of multifamily housing.
They have to meet certain criteria from the state, and that includes some affordable units.
Got it. Okay.
It doesn't have to be all affordable, but it has to include some affordable units.
And it also has to be, I think, within a half a mile of transit. So that puts a lot of the downtown and definitely East Cotati properties, some of the infill East Cotati properties, as able to be utilized for this type of development.
Okay, I see. Okay, I think that I'll save the rest of my comments for later, but any other questions before we move into questions or comments from the public?
I have one, Brittany. Would this be very similar to like the bridge housing down at Centera Way? Would this qualify something like that?
Noah, do you know the?
Yeah, it definitely would, but without as much of the design input that the city went through, the iterations to get the design that was approved. And then also that project includes a fair amount of extra parking and public park as a part of it. So the ability for the city to kind of exact those other things would be taken off the table through SB 35. And I will just say, while SB 35 is the topic that everyone is talking about, I anticipate the state will make more moves to direct by right processes for housing. And so having some level of objective guidelines in place will be beneficial moving forward, regardless of whether we actually see an SB 35 project or not, because this is just the drumbeat that the state has been, the drum they've been beating for years, and it's not letting up at all.
Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
I guess I had a question to follow up on this, and I think it's already been answered, but would all the locations that we're being considering for cottage housing, with those examples, would they all be something that somebody could come in and do this sort of development? And I think it was mentioned the aspect of they had to be near a public transit, but
yeah, there are several. So the cottage housing proposal is citywide in almost every zoning district, not the rural residential, but all other residential districts. Whereas most of the properties on the west side of town are not going to qualify for these types of projects, and those ones further south on Old Redwood Highway would also not qualify. There may be some on Highway 116 that do. Some of those large parcels on Highway 116 may qualify. I'd have to review the standards again, but currently under SB 35, at least, not the entire city is open to these types of projects, whereas the proposed cottage housing ordinance does apply citywide.
Okay, so that was thank you for that answer. So one example of something that might be open is the sort of the Gravenstein Way specific plan area.
Correct, because that is a PDA, that is a priority development area because it has a transit route. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
I had just a question. I just wanted to clarify the small cell networks. Are those mostly used for like larger multifamily developments versus, are they used for single family homes, or are they mostly used in multifamily developments?
The ones I've seen have been in both. They're generally scattered to fill in around the community to fill in gaps. So they could be near single family, it could be near multifamily.
Great, thank you.
Can I provide an answer to that as well? I think it's the chair, through the chair.
Go ahead.
I think this is part of something called G5 that's coming through. And I mean, it would be good to try and frame it as much as possible, because I understand the FCC is just required that everybody, they can be put in everywhere per the requirement of the carriers rather than everything else. But the one thing is, don't use your cell phone for streaming data. Because that's what it's really going to do, is facilitate all the video coming through on the cell phones. But it's a bigger issue, and I'm happy to privately, offline, talk to anybody about it. It's a bit of a pain in some ways.
That is correct. It's a response to 5G, which requires line of sight cell networks to be closer together. And so the law has allowed them to put those internal to cities and utilize existing infrastructure in front of single family homes, multifamily homes, and commercial properties.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm going to open it up for questions or comments from the public. Please say your name for the record before starting your comment.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. And as a reminder to the attendees, use your raise hand icon or dial *9 from your telephone. And it appears there is no public comment.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll open it back up to the commissioners to provide any final comments or questions, and we'll start with Commissioner Rodriguez.
Chair Murphy, if I may, prior to that, we may want to, this might be a good opportunity to open it back up to the principals from Archeologics, just to see if they have anything to kind of further frame the conversation, then to allow the commission to deliberate with all the information available.
Absolutely. Can we start with Mitch Connor?
Sure. Mitch Connor, principal with Archeologics. Happy to be here this evening and to have the opportunity to, add to these important documents or guidelines. Yeah, my comment probably has more to do with, the actual design of the buildings and the question about sort of the architectural style that may or may not be appropriate for Cotati. And, that's a question that we encounter just about in every community. And, I think there are certain, shall we call them, tricks of the trade that sort of take the pressure off, any one building having to, stylistically nail it, in a perfect sense. And by that, I mean, I know, and I live in Windsor and was a planning commissioner here. And, I think that the city, has an opportunity through the public realm to kind of lay out a context of certain design elements, meaning public realm elements that sort of take your eye off the building, so to speak. So the building doesn't have to sort of, muscle up, shall we say, to meet a certain design style, if it's set into, this sort of public realm context in the appropriate way. So, signage and street improvements and different things like that, tend to create kind of a nice sort of fabric that these buildings can fit into. So, and having worked in Santa Barbara, Joel mentioned that the early part of my career, I was there, and And in those days, they weren't very prescriptive. So what you were getting is all kinds of sort of watered down versions of Spanish and Mediterranean style architecture. And finally, they realized that it was truly part of their heritage. And then they really got very prescriptive about it. And I think it, you know, it increased the success of projects in that downtown district to, you know, become stylistically appropriate for the history of the community and so forth. So if you're going to go that way, if you're going to say, hey, stylistically, we want this district to do something versus that one, then you're probably going to move into a more prescriptive, detailed sort of context of planning guidelines and or design guidelines, excuse me, to help the developer and the architects, you know, perform at that level. So, but it can be softened in a way by dealing with the public realm. The other thing on the mixed use, and we've struggled with this in Windsor, and I've lived on the town green for 18 years, and that is that, and you had a really good urban retail consultant when you did your downtown guidelines several years ago. And one of the things that is a challenge is that even though retail is difficult right now, but it will come back. And one of the challenges is that is the size of the retail footprint. So what we suffered from here in Windsor was a format or a scale of retail that didn't lend itself to a bigger format kind of retail idea that offset the smaller, you know, sort of mom and pop retailers, which is what cities are made up of. So if you're going to encourage retail and you're going to encourage mixed use, that's going to be one of the challenges, is to sit down and sort of figure out how do you couple together enough of this sort of retail footprint to make it not only financially viable, but to have a, you know, kind of an impact on your downtown. Because you always hear things like, well, we'd like to have a market downtown. Well, it's one thing to have a, you know, a convenience store. It's another thing to have a Trader Joe's, let's say, like you see in Novato, which they did in their downtown. So, so that's, I think, part of your challenge is that you're going to have to model the retail going forward and try and encourage that and incentivize mixed use development to accomplish that. So those are just two things that sort of jumped out.
I think I would sort of piggyback on a little bit on what Mitch has to say, sort of about when you start to put prescriptive standards in place, you know, that you're careful about what you're trying to do, that you either go all the way or you sort of hold back and allow some flexibility in the system. I'll speak a little bit to the development side of it. We work on a lot of development work, and sometimes when I see sort of in the beginning of the presentation tonight, we're talking about sort of providing missing middle housing in the community. That is a real good project delivery system for getting more housing into your community. If you're failing on your RENA targets, which, you know, most communities are, and you want to have a more robust opportunity for affordable housing to come into the community, then you need to think about this in terms of what actually works. And development is horribly complicated and horribly expensive. And so I would encourage you that if you're going to cap things, cap height, and use those kinds of very prescriptive standards, that you be careful of what unintended consequence that is. And what that may mean is that you will get less of the kind of housing that you're looking for. And I think that's sort of what Joel had alluded to on a number of things. There are design standards that, you know, they sort of, they look good on paper, but I can tell you that as architects and planners and development consultants, when we're trying to apply those to specific sites, it can become very, very complicated to make the projects work. And then all of a sudden, you don't have a project that that actually pencils. And it's why we see a lot of projects that are approved and never built. So the one thing I'm sure you're all you know, supportive of is that you need more housing in your community, at least more affordable housing in your community. We need that in every community in the state of California, let alone Sonoma County and Cotati. And so SB 35, even though feeling at times like it might be a little heavy-handed, is there for a reason. it came about because communities weren't meeting the requirements, and now housing is astronomically expensive throughout the county, and it's not getting better. So I would encourage you to sort of balance all of this, and definitely you have a beautiful little community there that you want to protect. On the other hand, you also want to make it inclusive, and in order to do that, these are the kinds of decisions that can have negative impacts down the road to your ability to deliver that to your own community. So that's my take on it, and hopefully you'll continue working on it. Joel's certainly going to continue on with Noah, and to the degree that Archaeologics can help navigate through this, this is what we do, this is what we love, so we're here to help.
Thank you both. That was very helpful. Great insight to provide. So I will open it back up to the commissioners to ask additional questions of staff or Mr. Stanley or Mr. Connor, or provide comments. And we'll start with Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yeah, it's more of a comment. Even though the specific architectural style is not required, there was a comment from the community regarding all these various projects and locations throughout the county. And one said, since there were so many to review, after a while, they all kind of started looking the same. And I kind of agree with that. And so somebody mentioned murals earlier, and I think that's a really good idea to maybe break up the, make it more lively. And I think that was my, somebody else answered the question about the antennas.
I apologize, Commissioner Rodriguez, you're breaking up a little bit. So I'm going to come back around to you in case you have additional questions, but I think we were able to capture much of what you said. So thank you for that. Moving on to Commissioner Hancock.
Yes, hello. I'm very interested to hear the way that Commissioner Moore phrased some of the issues for the planning side. I'm not too sure what we can do further. I very much appreciate, I think it was Mitch Connor sort of saying, well, the public space is what we really see or a part of and feel. And again, I'm not too sure if there's a design standard. I guess overall, I'm not clear about which parts of Cotati this could impact. There are areas that I think, like Gravenstein Way, or the PDA area there, though, this seems like it would fit into, and there have been proposals already in that area. And it would be ideal how the traffic situation fits into it, how vehicular parking fits into it is always, sort of a big issue. So I think this is helpful to get a visibility that it's there, that somebody could come into town and do it, but it's a little bit confusing as to where it might apply in Cotati. So thank you very much. And as far as I understand, we're not making any determination this evening, are we? This is just a process for education and airing the community direction.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Can we get a bit more clarification for Commissioner Hancock on where we would see this come up geographically in Cotati?
You would, because of California tiger salamander, generally I would say the west 2/3 of Cotati would be off limits based upon the current mapping for California tiger salamander. So you're basically talking about east of Old Redwood Highway.
And part of the intent is just to allow the commission to kind of identify some concerns and give some of the direction to staff to further flush these issues out. So this is one thing, when we bring these back, we will provide a graphic or a map that shows where SB 35 could apply to these projects.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to Commissioner Moore.
So I just had a couple comments. So Mitch had a comment about he lives in Windsor. So basically you had the Olivers come in and save that area down there. And I can totally appreciate that, because I know we looked at some bigger projects on Old Redwood Highway. It had more mixed use of smaller and bigger retail going in there. And I can appreciate that, because obviously you need both to kind of make a vibrant community. You know, I've been on planning commission a long time. So I always had a saying that says developers can't see it from their front door. So when I look at things that I have approved over the past that are not so great, that I have to drive by, and then I see projects that I'm very proud of, that you know, have been part of the planning process, I'm just kind of a little bit horrified of this right now. Just because I see projects in Santa Rosa on the 16 that were put up. There was only one project from Cotati. And I see a lot of those projects in Santa Rosa that are, you know, bigger projects that have gone through. And some of them are great and some of them are not so great. And I'm just talking design. I'm not talking about like housing and housing folks and things like that. I'm just talking about design that's gone in and materials that have gone into the projects. So I would be more in favor of, if we did do standards, to keep them fairly strict when people are coming into Cotati. I don't really like the idea of keeping it really fluid. But that's just my own opinion on that. And maybe somebody can prove me wrong. But I know we're just talking about this in generality right now. And I like the idea of having standards of height and setbacks and things like that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner or Vice Chair Lemus.
Thank you. I just want to say that I appreciate all the comments. And what Lisa, Commissioner Moore had just mentioned. So I'm interested also in the follow-up workshops. Meanwhile, I'll do my homework and kind of learn more about this as well. Because I also, you know, want the Cotati to move in the right direction for the future. And so I think that, you know, we're in the right place right now to do that. So I appreciate all your comments and all the information that staff and everyone else provided. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mostly had comments, no additional questions, and wanted to say again, thank you so much to Mr. Stanley and Mr. Connor. Your feedback was very helpful. In fact, some of what was said, I think, really helped put my feelings into words. Particularly, you know, the thought that sometimes when good planning doesn't take place, you can see kind of a watered down approach of the design and architecture of our city. I would say first and foremost, it's really important to me to make sure that I'm part of efforts that provide fair and equitable housing. But this is very worrisome in that we're such a small city that even one project could really have an impact on kind of the personality and the feel of Cotati. And so I think I would also lean toward having stricter guidelines or standards, I should say, as we're working through this. That being said, I fully appreciate that I'm not a city planner. And I think it is my responsibility to take the guidance of our staff, because this is what they live and breathe every day. So I want to make sure we don't write ourselves into standards that create more harm than good. But I guess what that means is that there's a huge task ahead in trying to figure out how to find that balance. So I appreciate you bringing this to us early. I know that we're still, it sounds like, in the early phases of pulling this together, but it's really nice to be a part of the conversation now. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation in the coming months. I didn't want to comment on the small cell networks because I'm not sure if what's on the polls is for rent or profitable. And so I'll recuse myself from that since I work for PG&E. But I do want to say in general, I fully support murals. I'm incredibly excited that the entire commission commented on that. So I want to chime in and say, absolutely, if there's a way for us to fit that into any sort of guidance, I would support it. And with that being said, I think that those are all of our comments for this particular item. And it doesn't look like there's anything we need to make a motion on. So would it be appropriate to move into our next agenda item? Great.
Yes.
Okay, and again, thank you so much, Mr. Connor and Mr. Stanley. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. Good night.
Good night. We'll move into agenda item F, which is reports by staff.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say, so we are putting together our annual progress report for housing element implementation that will be presented to the City Council at the next meeting. I'm sorry, it was my goal to bring it before the Planning Commission ahead of the City Council. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it on this agenda, and we have to submit it to the state by April 1st. And so what that means is I will bring it to you at your next agenda or next meeting so you can review it and we can discuss it. Essentially, we've built 20 homes in Cotati over the last year. We're actually doing fairly well towards meeting our RENA allocation in low income, moderate income, and market rate housing. What we are not doing well in is meeting our allocation for very low income. So as of right now, this is I believe the 6th year in the current RENA cycle. We were assigned 147 units to build. Like I said, we're doing across the whole spectrum of affordability. We're doing fairly well with the exception of those very low income units. I think we've built a total of 5 or 6 of those units. I don't have the report in front of me right now, out of some allocation of like 45 or 46. So those are the toughest ones to get constructed. As you can imagine, they require the most subsidy. Some commissioners may be aware that we had approved the Cotati Station project, which is a 74-unit apartment project next to the train station. That was approved as a market rate project, but the developer is struggling to finance it and had approached Bridge Housing to have them build it as an affordable housing project. The City Council supported that with a commitment of $750,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. To date, Bridge has not been able to figure out how to make that project pencil either. And so it's my understanding they are no longer in discussions with the owner. The owner is kind of put it back out on the market to sell, looking and hoping to find an affordable housing developer to construct it. But as of right now, the ability to have the project cover its costs, even as an affordable housing project and with a significant contribution from the city, the pro forma is not allowing that project to pencil. And so it sits not moving forward. So just kind of an update. The report that we will be providing to the state also provides a summary of our efforts to implement the housing element. As I mentioned, that's an 8-year cycle, and we will be kicking off the update to the housing element this fiscal year, with the update process mainly occurring in the next fiscal year. We did get some grant money to help support that, so that's very much appreciated. And that will also be a discussion for the budget coming before the City Council, but we'll also include it as a part of the discussion to the Planning Commission to kind of paint the overall broader picture, separate from just meeting individual RENA numbers or housing numbers, but all the other efforts that the city is committed to through the housing element to support housing throughout the community, and then what we've been doing to try to do that. And then we'll ask the commissioner to provide some priorities of the remaining items, so that way we can focus our efforts in the final 2 years of this cycle, which will end in 2023. By that time, we have to have the new housing element adopted. And I will say, housing is getting to be less and less discretionary, meaning it's more and more prescribed, and the state is taking more and more local control away from housing decisions. And that will be, I promise you, that will be a theme of the legislation to come out of the state in the near future. With that, I don't have any other items to discuss. Kessing Ranch is moving forward. They've pulled more than half the building permits for that, and they're selling well. They've approached us to move forward with building the 7 affordable housing units that were required as a part of that project. And so we will see those getting built in the near future. And we're trying to work with the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma County, who recently got their final approval on Jamie Lane. So they're moving forward with developing those 5 units. So we will have a fair amount of for sale affordable homes coming online in the relatively near future for the members of the community.
Great, thank you so much, Noah. We will move into item G, reports by the commission. And I'll just go down the list here. Commissioner Rodriguez, do you have any reports?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hancock?
I don't have any reports, but I would just like to welcome Commissioner Rodriguez to the committee, and being thrown in the deep end here with the detail. We're really not usually quite as long as this, but anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Hancock. Commissioner Moore?
I just had a couple, and actually these are questions for Noah. When we have a canceled meeting, like for March 1st, there was like no notification that it was canceled. So I don't know if anybody else got that, but I didn't get an email that it was canceled until like that day. So
Yeah, my apologies. So normally our currently what our process says is we have to publish the Friday ahead of the Monday meeting, and so at a minimum that should be provided, those 3 days ahead of time. But we are always striving to provide information, whether it's agenda packet materials or a notice of cancellation ahead of that. And I will look at that and make sure that we do better. And I apologize.
Yeah, and there was just one other thing. I know we used to have something about the naming of the streets, and I don't know who does that. It used to be Prue, do the recommendations, and so I just wanted to get some clarification on naming of the streets, since we're going to have some projects come through, on how we're dealing with that now, or if we have a list of names, or are you going to the Historical Society? Anyways, just a question on that. Yeah, that's all I have. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that the city's policy is that street names have to be named after historical families in Cotati. And it's also my understanding that Ms. Prue Draper worked with the city to provide a list of those names, which we do have, and we would usually provide that list to the developers, and they would choose from the list, obviously crossing off ones that get chosen. I have not confirmed this, but I will. It's my understanding we still have some names available, but what I have not been able to do or haven't taken the time to do is engage to the Historical Society and reach out to kind of the next in line for working with us to try to make sure that we keep that list up to date and available. So I will do that. Obviously with COVID, there's been some challenges, but I wanted to engage with the Historical Society even before COVID. And so this is a good reminder and a good reason to do so.
So I just had one caveat on that is, I would love to see more women having their names on things in Cotati. Are people of color. I mean, we have a lot of names of historical figures, but those are my goal is to try to name be more inclusive in our naming of streets.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Appreciate you bringing that up. Vice Chair Lemus.
Yes, I also want to support that comment by Commissioner Moore, and welcome to Commissioner Rodriguez. And also this Thursday, if you're interested, Luciana is presenting a federal legislative update. It'll be on Facebook Live at 6 o'clock on Thursday with Congressman Thompson and Congressman Huffman this Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anything to report, but I also wanted to welcome Commissioner Rodriguez. Very exciting to have someone new on the commission. And if there are no other comments, then we will move into item H, which is items received after the agenda. We did receive a public comment, and I apologize here. I'm just looking back at my notes. We received a public comment, a letter from Generation Housing, and that will be available online later this week to ensure that everyone has access to it. And with that, I'll just ask the staff, are there any other items that we need to discuss or report out on before we adjourn? Okay, meeting adjourned. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.